Hello and welcome. Relax, take a deep breath, and enjoy this story. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Now, let's begin, and may you have a peaceful sleep. In the dead of night, the moonlight poured through the clouds, casting a faint glow on the desolate road. The protagonist trudged forward, driving an old car toward a small town called Black Creek. This place was nearly impossible to find on the map, as if hidden in a corner of the world. She had no particular reason for coming here. She was simply drawn by the name of the town. Its mysterious aura seemed to beckon an unknown adventure. The view outside the car window gradually became blurry, with empty lands and sparse trees stretching out in eerie silence. The sound of the engine echoed unnervingly in the quiet night. The protagonist's mood grew tense, and without realizing it, her speed began to slow. Finally, she reached the entrance of the town, greeted by an old wooden sign with faded paint that read, Black Creek. The town lacked modern amenities. The streets were lined with ancient houses, buildings that seemed to date back to the mid-20th century. Despite it being night, there were no streetlights, and the only source of light was the occasional flicker of neon signs on the roadside. The car slowly drove along the narrow street, and the surrounding silence was profound, as if the entire town was immersed in an indescribable, somber atmosphere. The protagonist's eyes scanned the area outside the window, noticing faint light glowing from some of the residents' windows. Occasionally, she spotted pedestrians on the street, but their steps were slow and stiff, their eyes vacant, oblivious to the passing car. Suddenly, the car stopped in front of a small bar. The bar's sign read, Black Creek Tavern, the letters barely legible, as though it hadn't been repaired in years. A feeling of unease surged within the protagonist. Once the engine shut off, the surrounding quiet grew more suffocating, as if even the wind had stopped blowing. At that moment, a middle-aged man in a tattered trench coat emerged from the bar. His pale face and hollow eyes sent a chill down her spine. The man glanced at the protagonist's car before slowly approaching her. In a low, raspy voice, he said, "You're not from around here, are you?" His tone was heavy, as though some ancient prophecy was coming from his lips. The protagonist cleared her throat, feeling uneasy, but she replied, "I'm just passing through, planning to stop and rest for a while." The man didn't answer immediately. He stared at the car window for a long while, then slowly shook his head. "Resting is fine, but don't stay too long. The nights here aren't suited for lingering." With that, he turned and walked back into the bar. The protagonist's heart suddenly raced. Despite the man's calm tone, she felt a strange sense of alertness at that moment. The feeling of unease slowly crept up her spine, as if someone were watching her from behind. Deciding not to stay any longer, the protagonist started the car and continued toward the town center. The bar gradually faded from sight, but the man's warning lingered in her mind. This town seemed to harbor some secret, waiting to be uncovered. As the car ventured deeper into the town, the old houses began to grow denser. It seemed like the area had been abandoned for a long time. The lights along the streets had been extinguished, and only the occasional flicker of light from distant windows remained. More and more houses emitted a mysterious air, as though they concealed an ancient history, waiting for some unwelcome guest to arrive. This town, it seemed, was no ordinary place. That night, the protagonist checked into the only inn in town, the Black Creek Inn. The inn appeared slightly more modern than the town itself, but still carried an air of antiquity. The lobby was simply furnished, with yellowed oil paintings on the walls that exuded the scent of time. The receptionist was a frail, middle-aged woman with hollow eyes. as though she hadn't looked away from her old register book in years. "How long will you be staying?" she asked in a low voice, her eyes lifting from the register, but staring at the protagonist with an unfamiliar gaze, as if she'd never seen an outsider before. "Just for one night," the protagonist replied, feeling a slight chill in her heart. The woman said nothing further, only handing the protagonist a key and directing her upstairs. The hallway was dim, with faint light flickering. The protagonist's footsteps echoed through the empty corridor, the sound like it belonged to another world. Once inside the room, the protagonist quickly shut the door. Though the room was old, it was relatively clean. Moonlight streamed in through the window, illuminating the simple bed and worn-out furniture. The protagonist shuddered involuntarily, feeling the air heavy, as though the place had been forgotten by time. Though she tried hard to relax, her mind remained restless. The protagonist lay on the bed, browsing social media on her phone to pass the time. Suddenly, a low wind sound came from outside the window, and the curtains swayed gently, as if someone were watching her from outside. The protagonist lifted her head and glanced out the window. Nothing was there. Time passed slowly, and drowsiness began to take over. Finally, the protagonist closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep. However, sleep did not bring peace. As night deepened, a sense of unease quietly crept in. The protagonist's sleep was not deep, as if she were always being pulled by some unseen force. The first dream came after midnight. In the dream, the protagonist stood in an unfamiliar forest. Thick fog filled the air, and the trees were tall and eerie, their branches intertwining, blocking the moonlight. The surroundings were completely silent. Even the wind had vanished. The protagonist's heart raced as she felt some unknown presence drawing near. Suddenly, a low voice whispered in her ear, "You've come." The protagonist turned sharply, seeing a blurry figure standing in the thicket. Its hunched shape and indistinct face resembled a ghost walking out of the darkness. The figure stood still, silently watching the protagonist, its mouth curling into an inexplicable smile. "Why have you come here?" the figure asked softly, its voice like the wind whispering across the ear, sending a chill down her spine. The protagonist tried to speak, but her throat felt constricted by some invisible force, unable to produce a sound. Fear began to spread in her chest, and her body grew immobile. Suddenly, the figure stepped closer, its eyes glinting with an eerie light, as if they could pierce through everything. "No, no." The protagonist struggled, but still couldn't make a sound. As the figure drew closer, the fog thickened around her, and the forest image started to blur. The protagonist began to hear cries from afar, low and mournful, as if coming from a distant place. Each cry made her heart beat faster, and her body felt heavier with each passing moment. When the figure finally reached out its hand, the protagonist suddenly woke up, drenched in cold sweat, breathing rapidly, eyes scanning the room. The room was dark, with only the moonlight streaming in through the curtains, and the air felt oppressive, a sense of unease lingering inexplicably. Another dream. The protagonist tried to calm her emotions, deciding to fall asleep again, but this time, the dream did not end. She fell back into sleep, entering another, even stranger dream. This time, the protagonist found herself standing on the street of the town, completely deserted. The town's buildings were still old, the street devoid of any traffic or pedestrians, as if time had stopped at some unknown moment. Walking down the street, the protagonist noticed that the windows of the bar and inn emitted faint light, but strangely, there was no one inside. The air was thick with a decaying odor, suffocating her. Suddenly, the protagonist spotted a familiar figure. It was the bartender from the tavern. He stood at a distance, staring at her, a faint smile curling at the corner of his mouth, as if he had known of her arrival long before. "You finally arrived." His voice echoed in the air, exactly like the whisper from the dream. The protagonist's heart raced, realizing that she seemed to have fallen into a cycle of nightmares again. The man's smile made everything seem even more eerie and terrifying. The next morning, the protagonist woke up, still feeling an inescapable unease. Though sunlight streamed through the curtains, bringing a hint of warmth to the ancient town, the dream from the previous night still lingered in her mind, as though the shadows from the dream were still hanging in the air. She tried to shake off the discomfort, deciding to leave the inn, step out of her room, and take a deep breath of fresh air, attempting to push the suffocating feelings aside. The town's appearance in the morning was vastly different from the night before. Sunlight bathed the weathered houses, and the streets were quiet and empty, with occasional townsfolk passing by. Their steps were steady and slow, but each person would stop and stare at the protagonist as she passed by. This unblinking gaze filled her with an indescribable tension. After walking for a while, the protagonist came across an old house at the edge of town. The house was at the end of the street, far from the town center, nearly consumed by dense trees and vines. The exterior walls were weathered, and part of the roof had collapsed, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. The windows were broken, the paint on the window frames had peeled off, and the wooden door looked like it might fall off its hinges at any moment. Unlike the other ancient buildings around it, this house's gloom and decay stood out starkly. The protagonist felt a strong sense of curiosity and couldn't resist walking closer to the house. The closer she got, the more she felt a cold breeze rush toward her, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The house was eerily quiet, devoid of any sign of life, yet it seemed to pull at her with an unexplainable force. Just as she stopped in her tracks, an elderly woman appeared from around the corner of the street. She was wearing a tattered black cloak. Her face was aged with deep wrinkles, and her eyes were cloudy, as if she couldn't see the path ahead. The woman slowly approached the protagonist and whispered, "You shouldn't go to that house." The protagonist froze, a sense of confusion rising within her. The woman's voice was low and hoarse, carrying a threat that couldn't be ignored. "Why?" The protagonist couldn't help but ask. The woman didn't answer immediately. She stared at the house for a long time, as though deep in thought. Finally, she spoke slowly. "That place is cursed. Many years ago, someone died in there, and their soul still lingers." "The soul of a dead person?" the protagonist asked, unable to believe it. The woman nodded, her gaze still deep. "You'll hear sounds, whispers, footsteps, as if someone is calling you. But when you look back, there's nothing." She paused, lowering her voice. "No one who goes in there ever comes out alive." These words made the protagonist's heart race. She was about to say something, but was suddenly interrupted by the woman. "You'd better leave, young one." The woman turned and walked away slowly, her pace heavy and dragging, as if disconnected from time itself. Her words echoed in the air, but her figure soon disappeared around the corner of the street. The protagonist stood there, feeling the unease growing stronger. Was there some unknown secret behind this house, or were the townspeople just trying to scare outsiders for their own protection? Her curiosity began to take over, and she wanted to know more. The protagonist decided to go see the old house for herself. Whether or not the woman's warning was true, the mysterious pull of the house was too strong, as if all the answers were hidden there. Entering the house. The protagonist walked around the dilapidated fence surrounding the house and made her way to the decaying wooden door. The doorknob was rusty, as if no one had touched it in years. When the protagonist turned the doorknob with some effort, the door creaked loudly, as if it had long been waiting to welcome the intruder. The door finally opened, and the protagonist cautiously stepped inside. A cold breeze rushed to meet her. The air inside was damp and heavy, filled with the stench of decay. Dust and broken glass were scattered across the floor, and the paint on the walls had peeled off, leaving faded marks. It was clear that no one had lived here for years, with only cobwebs and black stains in the corners as signs of its past existence. The protagonist slowly walked forward, each step on the creaky wooden floor, echoing in the empty room. The house's structure was strange. The stairs led to the second floor, but there seemed to be no furniture or decoration. Faint whispers seemed to drift through the air, sending a chill down the protagonist's spine. The sounds seemed to come from a distance, as if something was waiting for her in the darkness. For some reason, her steps became heavier, and her heart began to beat faster. As she reached the center of the house, a cold gust of wind blew through, causing the window to rattle slightly. The protagonist looked up and noticed a large chunk of plaster had fallen from the ceiling, revealing a dark corner within. Just then, a faint sound came from the corner of the room, like a whisper or a low growl. The protagonist's heart raced, and her steps involuntarily stopped. "You've come!" The voice came again, low and hoarse, as if from beneath the ground. It carried a strange temptation, as though it was calling to her. A chill ran through the protagonist, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. The voice felt too real, as if it was right beside her. After escaping from the old house, the protagonist's heart was still racing. The low, haunting whispers and suffocating chill from within the house echoing in her mind. Though the experience was terrifying, her curiosity had not dissipated. Back at the inn, she decided to delve deeper into the town's past, particularly the mystery surrounding that house. After all, every town had its history, and this one was clearly not simple. As the protagonist entered the inn's lobby, the receptionist, the middle-aged woman, was hunched over, flipping through an old book. Upon noticing the protagonist's arrival, she lifted her head and offered a faint smile, but said nothing. Her eyes remained hollow, as if she had little interest in anything around her. "You know, Black Creek has a long and complicated history," the protagonist ventured cautiously. The receptionist nodded slightly, her voice low. "Every place has its own story. If you want to know more, you'd better visit the town library. There's plenty of documentation there." The protagonist thanked her and left the inn. Although the library was at the other end of town, the journey felt unusually long. Along the way, she couldn't stop thinking about the sounds she had heard in the old house and the curse the elderly woman had mentioned. The town library didn't look very impressive. Its faded sign and cracked walls made it seem almost forgotten. However, inside it was unexpectedly quiet and tidy. The protagonist entered to find nearly no one there, except for an elderly librarian who was sorting books on a shelf. "Hello," the protagonist approached the librarian. "I'm looking for information on the history of Black Creek." The librarian looked up, his deep-set eyes studying her, as though weighing whether or not to offer assistance. After a moment, he spoke. "Interested in the town's history, huh? Many have been, but not everyone can bear the secrets that lie within." A shiver ran down the protagonist's spine, but she remained firm. "I'm not afraid. I just want to know the truth." The librarian sighed lightly, nodding before directing the protagonist to a corner of the shelves where books appeared to be very old, as though hiding forgotten pasts. He pulled out a worn logbook with a faded cover that read, "The Unsolved Mysteries of Black Creek." This book contains records about the town's history, and detailed accounts of some events, the librarian said. But be careful. After reading it, you might discover things you don't wish to know. The protagonist took the book, filled with both curiosity and apprehension. As she opened it, the words on the pages seemed to possess a strange allure, compelling her to read on without being able to resist. Uncovering the past. The unsolved mysteries of Black Creek detailed a number of strange events in the town's history. It revealed that the town hadn't always been so peaceful. Decades ago, a chilling disappearance had occurred. Legend had it that a young girl named Alice vanished mysteriously overnight, seemingly disappearing into thin air. Despite a thorough investigation by the police, Alice's whereabouts remained a mystery. What was even more shocking was that in the months following her disappearance, more mysterious vanishing incidents occurred. With each disappearance, rumors spread that certain families and places in the town were being controlled by some dark force. The members of these families seemed to grow more and more odd, their behavior no longer resembling normal human conduct. The book mentioned that all these incidents appeared to be closely linked to the old house at the town's center. Before Alice's disappearance, she had frequently visited the house. In fact, the last time her family saw her, she was near that same dilapidated house. What was even more bizarre was that those who had disappeared didn't seem to vanish entirely. Some claimed to have heard familiar whispers and footsteps at night, as if the missing people hadn't truly left, but had merely disappeared into some invisible dimension, still lingering in some corner. The book concluded with the revelation that only by finding the Black Creek source could the souls of the missing be set to rest. This Black Creek source had become the goal of many, but no one had yet uncovered its true nature. Into the fog. As the protagonist continued reading the historical records, the weight of the mysteries grew heavier. It became clear that the town harbored a massive secret, one that not only concerned the missing residents, but was also intricately tied to the old house and certain families in town. It seemed the townspeople had never revealed this history to outsiders, knowing that once the truth was uncovered, the consequences would be unimaginable. Just as the protagonist was about to leave the library, the librarian suddenly spoke up. "You know too much already, young one. It's best you leave Black Creek and go where you belong." His voice held a warning, low and serious. The protagonist felt an unprecedented sense of pressure. Though some hesitation lingered, she decided to continue her search. The fog of history was beginning to clear, but it was clear that everything was just beginning. After returning to the inn, the protagonist was filled with unease and confusion. The content she had read at the library the previous night only added to the chaos in her mind. The town's history and the missing cases began to intertwine, forming an inescapable mystery. That old house seemed to be the core of all the problems, hiding some unspeakable, terrifying secret. The next morning, the protagonist decided to leave the inn once again, trying to investigate further and find more clues. The town was still silent, with only the occasional passerby hurriedly walking by, seemingly oblivious to the presence of an outsider. The protagonist made up her mind to head back to that dilapidated old house, both fearful and strongly curious. When she reached the house, she noticed that the atmosphere was vastly different from her previous visit. The air around the house felt unnaturally heavy, as though some force was preventing her from getting any closer. Her heart raced, and after a brief hesitation, she pushed the door open. Entering the house, the room was still as decrepit as before, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. Her footsteps echoed through the empty space, a reminder of the house's eerie stillness. However, today was different. There was no dead silence. As time passed, she began to hear faint sounds, soft footsteps, seemingly coming from upstairs. After a moment of hesitation, the protagonist decided to go upstairs. Each step on the staircase creaked loudly, as if some unseen force was silently watching her. As she reached the second floor, the sound suddenly stopped, and the room was engulfed in complete silence. Her gaze swept the area and finally rested on a door that appeared ordinary. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, a faint light seemed to emanate from the room. She walked over, pushed the door open, and what she saw nearly took her breath away. The room was empty, but there was a bed, covered with a worn-out sheet. Above the bed, a tattered photograph was quietly placed. The photo was of a young girl, smiling with bright, clear eyes, yet her face seemed strangely unfamiliar. Instinctively, the protagonist picked up the photo. Suddenly, a low, guttural voice came from behind her. "You finally arrived." The voice wasn't clear, but it was so familiar, as if it was right next to her ear. The protagonist whipped around, but saw nothing. The room was still empty. The cold sensation returned, as though something was watching her from the darkness. Then, the protagonist's phone suddenly buzzed, showing a message. "If you don't want to disappear, you'd better leave." Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly checked the sender, but the screen showed nothing. No sender's name, no number. A thought flashed in her mind. This must be a warning from someone in town. The mysterious disappearance. Just as the protagonist was about to leave, she suddenly heard hurried knocking coming from downstairs. She quickly ran down, but found no one at the door. No matter what, this town was becoming increasingly unsettling. The protagonist had a strong feeling that she was being drawn into something beyond her control, something she couldn't escape. At that moment, she noticed a group of people gathered on the street not far from the inn, seemingly talking about something. The townspeople were standing together in small groups, whispering to each other, their faces tense and filled with worry. The protagonist walked over, trying to ask what had happened. "Another person has gone missing," an older man whispered, his voice filled with fear. "That's the second one. Yesterday, or the day before, no one saw him leave. It's like he disappeared overnight." "Disappeared?" the protagonist asked, unable to hold back. "You mean, like before?" The man fell silent for a moment, sighing deeply. "Yes, just like before. They didn't leave the town, and there's no sign they ever did. It's as if something took them away." A chill ran down the protagonist's spine. Was this related to Alice's disappearance? And to the old house? She began to realize more clearly that the terrifying secret hiding in this town wasn't just a relic of the past. It was now affecting everyone. The truth behind the disappearances. The protagonist decided to delve deeper into the truth behind these disappearances. After some investigation, she discovered a troubling pattern. Each disappearance occurred late at night, and the missing individuals were mostly young men from the town. They had last been seen in specific locations, near the old house, or on some hidden path through town. The most unsettling discovery was that, before each disappearance, the victims had interacted with certain specific families. Some said the missing persons had been summoned to a particular place, which often happened to be the old house. Many believed that the souls of these missing people were controlled by some dark force and were being forced to participate in some kind of ritual. The protagonist realized that the fate of this town was closely tied to the curse of the old house, and the terrifying cycle seemed to have never ended. Each missing person was another link in this vicious cycle, with more and more people being drawn in, until everyone in the town would become a part of the sacrifice. The low whispers, the mysterious photo, seemed to be some kind of signal telling the protagonist that she too had become one of the targets. As nightfall descended again, the air in Black Creek became even more oppressive. The protagonist stood by the window in the inn, staring out at the darkening sky, a deep sense of fear weighing on her heart. The mystery of the disappearances and the town's history were intertwining, forming an inescapable enigma. The old house seemed to be the heart of it all, hiding some unspeakable horror at its core. Each step the protagonist took toward the truth only seemed to pull her deeper into the dark curse of the town. That evening, the protagonist encountered a few of the town's residents. They were speaking in hushed tones, their faces grave. A middle-aged man quietly pulled her aside, speaking urgently. "You know too much already," he said, his voice low. "Leave now. You haven't seen the things you shouldn't." The protagonist's heartbeat quickened. This warning only made her more uneasy. "I can't leave. I need to find out what's happening here." The man looked at her, his gaze filled with complex emotions. He sighed deeply and spoke softly. "Do you really want to know the truth? Do you want to know the terror hidden in this town? If you do, you'd better be prepared." Then, the man told her something. This town had once gone through a terrifying ritual, an ancient sacrificial ceremony meant to summon a dark force to control everything in the town. Many years ago, some of the townspeople had participated in this ritual, unaware that what they were summoning was an uncontrollable evil. "The missing people," the man whispered. "They didn't truly disappear. Instead, their souls are trapped in another dimension. The whispers you've heard, those are the souls of the sacrificed, calling to you. They are trying to pull you into their world. And every person who participated in the ritual had to offer their own soul, or another's, to maintain the balance of the ritual," he continued. "Now that you've seen all of this, you're part of the game. Leaving is no longer an option." The man's face had turned pale. He glanced around, then leaned in, whispering, "If you want to survive, you have to find the source of the ritual, the Black Creek source. That's where the dark ritual originates. Only by destroying it can you end this nightmare." The protagonist's mind was filled with confusion and fear. What was the Black Creek source? Why had this town become so immersed in this dark ritual? And how could she stop it all? The Black Creek source. The man's warning etched itself deeply in the protagonist's mind. That night, she could not sleep. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man's story, the terrifying ritual, and the Black Creek source. She knew that only through further investigation could she hope to unravel the mystery and perhaps stop this dark force from spreading any further. The next morning, the protagonist decided to head to an abandoned church on the outskirts of town, which had once been the center of these rituals. According to the rumors, the Black Creek source was hidden in the basement of the church, accessible only to those who had been chosen. The library records indicated that the basement had long been sealed off, but there were still some secret passages passed down through the generations. The protagonist received a lead about the church basement from an elderly man in the town and learned that only at midnight could certain symbols be activated to open the passage to the basement. That night, she quietly made her way to the church, feeling the town's oppressive atmosphere pressing down on her. The church's exterior had fallen into ruin, its once majestic walls now covered in vines, the building looking as if it had been swallowed by time itself. The protagonist took a deep breath and entered the abandoned church. Inside, it was still empty, the remnants of incense long gone, leaving only the wind's whispers through the broken windows. Following the directions on the map, the protagonist found a hidden stone slab. When she pressed on it, there was a sudden vibration, and the slab slowly shifted, revealing a dark passage beneath. Cautiously, she stepped into the dim corridor, the surroundings feeling both oppressive and alien. The truth of the ritual. At the end of the passage, the protagonist entered a vast underground chamber, thick with suffocating air. In the center of the room stood a massive altar, covered with ancient symbols and surrounded by faint flames. Above the altar hung a broken mirror, reflecting the surrounding symbols, but showing no image of the room itself. The protagonist walked closer to the altar and realized that this was the very place where the town had once carried out the rituals. Upon the altar were some seemingly insignificant objects, broken crystals, candles made of ash, and some papers that were burned and unreadable. The air was thick with the atmosphere of an ancient ritual, as if this underground chamber were still carrying out some incomprehensible ceremony. Suddenly, a faint noise came from the corner of the room. The protagonist turned, only to find the elderly woman from the tavern standing there, her face pale and hollow, as though she had long been controlled by these evil forces. "You've come," the woman's voice was raspy, carrying an undeniable pull. "You've entered the heart of the ritual, and your soul will become a part of it." A wave of uncontrollable fear washed over the protagonist, and she wanted to run, but she found herself frozen. The woman's gaze seemed to hold a mysterious power, binding her tightly. "Anyone who tries to destroy this ritual becomes the next sacrifice," the woman continued in a whisper. "Your soul will remain trapped in this town, forever a part of us." At that moment, the symbols on the altar suddenly began to glow, as if something were being awakened. The protagonist felt an intense force surge from underground, and the entire room started to shake violently. The mirror on the altar blazed with blinding light, and all the whispers blended into a horrifying scream that filled the chamber. As the basement shook violently, the protagonist struggled to stay on her feet. The entire room seemed to be spinning, the symbols on the walls flashing with eerie light, and the air was filled with an overwhelming sense of oppression, suffocating her. The mirror on the altar reflected the protagonist's face, but its reflection was not clear like a normal mirror. Her face appeared distorted, as though something was twisting it. "You can't escape," the old woman's cold voice echoed. She stood beside the altar, looking at the protagonist with disdain. "You've entered the core of this ritual. Do you think you can stop it? You're wrong. Everything has already been decided." The protagonist's heartbeat quickened. Despite the suffocating fear surrounding her, some force deep within her refused to give in. In that moment, she realized she was not just fighting for the truth. She was fighting for the freedom of all the souls trapped in this town. Taking a deep breath, the protagonist focused on remaining calm, recalling the information she had gathered from the library and the townspeople. The Black Creek source was the origin of the town's curse. Only by destroying this source could the evil force that bound the town be undone. However, destroying the source was no simple task. The ancient symbols on the altar and the mirror were clearly gateways connecting this world to another dimension. "Do you want to destroy it?" The old woman's voice rang out again, this time with more mockery. "You think you can destroy this ritual and end this evil? You're nothing but an outsider, someone who doesn't understand their place." Just as the woman was about to issue another threat, the symbols on the altar suddenly began to flicker violently, and the shaking of the room intensified, as if the entire church was about to collapse. The protagonist noticed that the flickering symbols and the reflection in the mirror were beginning to merge, as though their connection was becoming stronger. "If you want to destroy it, you must first find the key." The woman suddenly stopped, her expression serious. "The key is in the mirror." The Protagonist's eyes widened in realization. The mirror contained the secret to breaking the curse. It was an ancient symbol, one that would only appear under specific conditions. As the town's history had recorded, only by reversing the ritual could this dark force be sealed away. Reversing the ritual. There was no time to hesitate. Without a second thought, the protagonist walked toward the altar, moving closer to the mirror. At that moment, the mirror's surface began to glow with an eerie light, as if it was absorbing all the surrounding energy. As the protagonist drew near, the reflection in the mirror began to clear, a massive shadow surrounded by an eerie mist. As the image in the mirror took shape, the protagonist's heart skipped a beat. The image seemed to be more than just a reflection. It appeared to be the manifestation of a trapped soul, peering through the mirror, trying to break through the barrier and control everything in the room. In that moment, the protagonist understood. The Black Creek source wasn't just the altar, it was the mirror itself. What appeared in the mirror was not the real world, but a locked alternate dimension, a place filled with darkness and evil spirits, where all the missing townspeople's souls were trapped, unable to escape. The protagonist closed her eyes, gathering all her willpower, trying to remember the steps to reverse the ritual. A line from the library echoed in her mind. Only with true spiritual power can the mirror's seal be broken and the dark force stopped. This meant that only by letting go of her fear and confronting the deepest shadows of her soul could she fight against this evil force. Taking a deep breath, the protagonist focused all her energy, raised her hands, and slowly touched the mirror. The moment her palms made contact, the mirror seemed to react, vibrating violently. Black mist began to pour from the mirror, engulfing the entire basement. The protagonist's body was racked with excruciating pain, as if being torn apart by an invisible force. "You can't do this!" the old woman screamed, trying to stop the protagonist. However, the protagonist did not back down. As her palms made contact with the mirror, the reflection began to distort, and the light grew even more intense. Suddenly, the protagonist's consciousness was sucked into the world within the mirror. She found herself surrounded by countless twisted figures. Fear and despair filled the air. Every missing soul seemed to be crying softly, as if begging for her help. But the protagonist gritted her teeth, and a new strength began to awaken inside her. Facing these lost souls, she felt an unprecedented sense of purpose. She was not alone. These souls needed help, and she now understood that she was the chosen one, the one who could end it all. With a sudden crash, the mirror shattered. The black mist scattered, and the shaking in the basement stopped. The entire underground chamber returned to stillness. The end, freedom, and destruction. The moment the mirror shattered, the protagonist felt a powerful force tear through the space, and the dark dimension collapsed completely. All the trapped souls struggled and cried in the black mist before disappearing with the shattering of the mirror. The basement was restored to silence, and the lost souls seemed to have found peace. The old woman's figure slowly disappeared with the tremors, seemingly consumed by the mirror's power. The church's walls began to crumble, and the symbols on the altar faded, leaving the entire basement free from its oppressive weight. The protagonist felt a wave of dizziness, but also an unprecedented sense of lightness rising in her heart. The curse on the town had finally been broken, and all the fear had dissipated. Standing among the ruins of the church, the protagonist looked at the shattered mirror, knowing that everything had come to an end. Black Creek was no longer the place filled with shadows. It had returned to peace. The protagonist finally understood that fear and darkness were not invincible. Only by facing the deepest shadows within oneself could one break all bonds and gain true freedom?